This topic is huge. How do you work and have a career and actually advance in your career even though you have PTSD symptoms from childhood? Past trauma can really block your ability to handle yourself and take the necessary actions that anyone needs to take if they're going to pursue a professional dream that involves staying productive and working with other people, which frankly can be hard for us. Because just about all jobs and all professional accomplishments involve that, productivity and connecting with people. So here are some major areas that I recommend you work on healing so that you can enjoy and advance in your career. All right, number one, you'll need to heal the tendency to wear the harshness of your past or of the present, like on your sleeve. Do you know that saying, like you just show it to the world? So you wouldn't want to be talking about the past all the time. You wouldn't want to be using it as your identity or bragging about it. Like, it was so bad for me, everybody. I know very well how this can be a problem because I grew up like welfare poor. And I had parents who were incredibly brilliant. My mom, my dad, my stepdad. The problems in the family, mostly stemming from alcoholism, actually, in some of the members, it absolutely crushed my parents' lives. They were all highly educated, but they were frustrated. We were poor most of the time, and there was a world of trouble and grief because of their struggle. And that's the background where I grew up. And like so many of you, I was determined that I would never be like them. I would be different. And in some ways I was. I didn't become an alcoholic, probably through no great virtue, but because of luck of the genetic draw. I was a great student. I was intelligent, but mostly I didn't have any supervision from parents. So when it was time to go to college, I had no idea how to go there. I walked into the admissions office at the University of Arizona in August of the year after I got out of high school, and I found out for the first time that you were supposed to apply and that you needed to take the SAT test. So that first semester, I went to community college and I cleaned houses to support myself. In the spring semester, I got into the U of A, but I had no idea how the whole thing worked or how I was supposed to support myself. And eventually I figured it out. I became a good student. And if that's all it took to have a good career, I would have been fine. But my problems went way beyond education. I had terrible self-esteem and I had trouble dealing with people. I was always in conflicts. Well, not always, but often in conflicts. And I'd make some new best friends and then the friendships would blow up. And this happened in my romantic life too, which really damaged the energy that I brought to work. And so these are some of the ways that people with trauma can wear their past on their sleeve. It just comes with you into the job. Another way that you could be wearing it on your sleeve, not that you mean to, but maybe you dress too shabbily. Maybe that the way you dress reflects low self-esteem or poverty consciousness. And it's not your fault that you grew up poor, and most people in the world are poor. But if you're trying to move up in the world, it's just really good advice that you would want to dress the part. And so putting energy into that, maybe you didn't learn it at home, but it's a good thing to do now. Another thing in that category of wearing your trauma on your sleeve is it's time to become mindful about how much you disclose to people about yourself, not just about your past and the trauma and, oh, I was abused. You don't necessarily want to bring that out very early in a friendship with somebody. But also self-disclosing about, what's going on at home right now, or how much traffic there was, or how sick you are, or what the symptoms were. Because I wasn't very consciously parented, my parents knew how to act with people, I think, but I was sort of feral, and I didn't know, and I would often go to work, and I would just be talking about problems and how much I resented people in the office, and I was just, I was sort of an open book, but not in a good way, and it stigmatized me. So another thing would be, you kind of almost brag about how bad things used to be in the past, just so that people will think that you're interesting or worthy, right? There's an element in our culture where we make victims into heroes only because they were victims. And it is heroic. It's a big deal to come up from a difficult past and to be working in a job. But it's appropriate to measure out how much you say about what that past is and not try to wear it like a badge of honor. all by itself. You know, you still, just like everybody there, you kind of have to prove yourself. You have to learn skills, you have to get along with people, and you have to get things done. That's kind of what jobs generally expect, right? All right, so the second big area, a big trauma symptom area that you're going to need to heal to succeed at work is to deal with the tendency to underfunction. Now, some of us are overfunctioners and some are underfunctioners. And I'll tell you what exactly that is in a minute, but people who overfunction, who do too much, who like stay too late, burn the midnight oil, burn themselves out, get really mad later that nobody reciprocated how much they're putting into a job or a relationship or something. With overfunctioning, there's often the big productivity crash that comes along, and you know, you can't stay with it. So you set this expectation, hey, I can do everything, I'm heroic, and then you can't. Underfunctioning is sometimes the consequence of overfunctioning for a period of time, or for some people, it's just like their basic speed. So underfunctioning includes things like having a really hard time focusing for a long period of time, you know, being restless at work, jumping on the internet, just can't really focus enough, being unreliable, not showing up on time for things where people were counting on you, or even worse, lying about the fact that you did it, or making up a fake story about why you didn't show up on time, or not even admitting that you did. There's like lying, and then there's pretending that it's not a problem, you know, if you didn't show up for something where people were counting on you. Personally, that's my pet peeve. I don't like it when people lie or don't admit. Like, if they just say, I made a mistake, I'm like, all right, I make mistakes, I get it. But if they're just like, yeah, but it was because of, you know, traffic or something, and I'm like, I drove here too, I know it's not traffic. Or they just don't even acknowledge, sorry, I'm late. Here's a little trick, by the way. When you come into a business meeting and you did have to be late, instead of coming in, it's very disruptive for the meeting. When you come in late to a meeting and people are already working, a person whose trauma is just hanging all over them comes in and goes, hey, I'm here. Oh my God, the traffic. Oh, I was trying to get here and I thought, and I was going to call, but I couldn't call. And that energy is really disruptive and calls a lot of attention to the fact that you're late. Here's what you can do when you're late. You come in very quietly, just don't let the door bang, you know, be quiet and come in and say, sorry, I'm late, and sit down, get out something to write on and start paying attention. You need not explain. If somebody asks you, maybe you can explain. Personally, I recommend experimenting with telling the truth about things. It holds you accountable for what's going on and allows you to make some positive changes in your life. All right, the third big symptom area of childhood PTSD that needs to be healed for you to succeed at work is a tendency to feel overwhelmed, like so overwhelmed that you can't even begin. You can't begin the work. Now, I get this. I get very overwhelmed. That's a PTSD thing I have. And I have a whole system. I have a morning routine that helps me start the day with a one foot in front of the other approach, rather than just a big, the day. I wake up like that. It's like an emotional flashback. My emotional flashbacks, that's a trauma thing. They're like this. I wake up and I'm like, it's been going on like in my dreams at night. I have dysregulation dreams even. And so I wake up sometimes in all this distress. It's like, I have so much to do. I have so much to do. And why is it me? Why is it me? I have to do everything. So that's an emotional flashback. When I start thinking that, if I don't stop it and start using my tools to come back and go, I don't have to do everything. I only have to do it one thing at a time. I can only do them, in a certain order. I'm going to make a list of what that order is and the best I can and start tackling it. To do that, I start with my morning routine, which always begins, I go get something to drink and I do my daily practice. And that's a specific writing technique followed by a specific meditation technique. Very simple, shockingly effective to help move that emotional flashbacky mind, those distressed hamster wheel thoughts of like, oh my God, I got to do so much. I got to do so much. That's the shape that my complex PTSD takes. And untreated, it just turns me into a nervous wreck who's angry, who's ineffective, who's isolated because the angry part is very offensive to other people. So instead, I make room in my mind for inspiration, creativity, ideas, and action by using these techniques. And if you ever want to learn those, they're always below all my videos. The daily practice, it's a free course. I think something like 500,000 people have taken it now, and that makes me so happy because it's really helpful. And the only way to find out if it helps you is to try it. So The overwhelm begins with, I get my mind in order with the racing thoughts and get the fearful and resentful thoughts out of my mind and onto paper. When I'm done with my daily practice, I take a shower, I go get my breakfast, and then I sit down and I work my to-do list. And I use an online tool for that. Lots of people have different ones. I use this thing called Kanban Flow, Kanban Flow. It's a free app, although I have a paid version. It's $5 a month or something. And it's a little structure where I can click and drag tasks into columns, and I color code them, and I plan each day of what I'm going to do. And I always put way too much in, and then at the end of the day, I can move them over into the next day or sort of rearrange the tasks ahead of me. And I love this tool. It's got a little timer built in, and it'll say, click the timer, it says, click on a task, and I go, oh, I'm going to, prep the intros to 5 videos or something. So I put that and I time that, like 5 videos, that's like an hour and a half for me, right? If I already know what the letters are, I've picked the letters, but I'm going to prepare the introductions and sort of think through, and what's the download I'm going to recommend at the end. I put some thought into that. Okay, hour and a half for me is this like green color. Half an hour is yellow. And 2 hours is blue. So I have the whole color system of how long something takes, and then I can sort of see my day. But I click on the task I'm going to do, and then I start a timer. And I've got my timer set at 25 minutes. It's called the Pomodoro method. Pomodoro is the Italian word for tomato, and legend has it, the person who invented this technique was using a timer shaped like a tomato, Pomodoro. and I do that 25 minutes. So like sometimes I try to freelance it and just get productive all by myself without a timer. And sometimes I am, and sometimes I'm not. I get very, I work on a computer, and also on my computer is this very interesting thing called the internet. And it's hard to resist going in there and go, oh, what's happening on YouTube today? How's the stats there? What are the comments? And Twitter and Facebook. Oh, somebody wants something. And next thing you know, I can't even remember what I intended to work on, literally. And you probably have the same thing. Like, I'm not being shocking here. I have that. I don't have ADHD. I'm very capable of focusing, but I need tools. And so setting a timer, it goes off after 25 minutes, and I shut down tabs, I shut down notifications for that period of time, and I just do that thing for 25 minutes. And it's really powerful if I can get started with a set of tasks that way. Being able to get things done is my superpower. I have so many like CPTSD traits that make it hard, but the reason I've been able to make a living in my life mostly, and certainly for the past 23 years, as a self-employed person, it's because I'm really good. I can see what needs to be done, and I can do it. And I used to do it for clients, and now I do it for Crappy Childhood Fairy. And I just have this very honed ability to go in and go, let's see, where are we? Where are we trying to get? What do we need to do? I have a big picture view of things. I'm good at that, analytical thinking. And people have different strengths, and that one's one of mine. So I can see what to do. And I used to be very helpful to my consulting clients, because I'd look at a project and then I would think through, here's where we need to be, here's what you need to do. And I would send them an email with this beautiful list of questions and action items. And that's like my dream, is that I have somebody like me who helps me do that now that I'm always like, out there leading Crappy Childhood Fairy. So staying organized, it's not natural to me because of my trauma, and I'm very good at it because of my ability to use tools. That's what I'm trying to get at. So that's overwhelm as something that keeps a person in underfunctioning. Another one is a tendency to favor doing grunt work for which you're gravely overqualified, rather than going for more challenging or higher paid roles, because you get so triggered that your CPTSD symptoms come out, that trying to stick your neck out or try something hard for you is too much. You can learn to bring that back down, but that's a sign that you're underfunctioning. If you're doing work where you're like, people don't even have any idea, like, I don't belong here, but we put ourselves there. We will often perceive ourselves as having no choice. But I'm making this video to try to talk to that part of you that knows that deep down inside there is a choice, and it might take some preparation and some courage and some work on healing your CPTSD symptoms so you can do it. But with more healing, you can take greater risks and put yourself out there and do the sort of job that you really can do, the one that gives you joy and that pays adequately. I want that for everybody. All right, another way that we underfunction is not asking for what we want. Do you do that? Where instead of saying, hey, you know what, I want to have a promotion, or I want to stop working in this part of the company and I want to work in that one, or I don't want to deal with this unpleasant person anymore. And we just think, oh, I have to put up with this. I can't, make a fuss because, again, I can't deal with how triggered I get around it. You might not even be consciously having that thought, but if you can't manage your CPTSD triggers and you get dysregulated and upset about things that set off your nervous system into CPTSD symptoms, you have to make your life small. Everything depends on learning to calm your triggers, not trying to make everybody else not trigger you. You can never really make that happen. But learning to calm your response to triggers until they're barely even triggers anymore. And then your life starts getting a lot bigger. That's underfunctioning. The thing about overfunctioning, the opposite, is like doing things for other people that they can do for themselves, trying to do more than your share, trying to prove yourself to the boss by like, look, I did 27 things for you instead of the one thing you asked. The problem with that is that if it's not rewarded, which it usually wouldn't be if it's not asked for, maybe, I don't know. But if it's not rewarded, it goes into resentment. The overfunctioning isn't like a genuine expression of yourself. It's a strategy to dance around and try to get somebody to like you and think you're good enough. So that's also like a CPTSD symptom to do that. We don't want to either overfunction or underfunction. There's a time for each. Like in vacation, maybe you underfunction. When there's a big deadline, you overfunction. But you don't want to be a person who's stuck in one gear or the other. All right. The third area of CPTSD symptoms that can really get in the way of your career growth is getting dysregulated on the job. Now, you can learn to re-regulate, and it will make all the difference. And I can just, like, that has been my experience. And it was very quick that I began to change when I learned to identify that I was dysregulated, and I used my tools to re-regulate. And again, that's the daily practice course I teach. It's down in the description section. I recommend that you take this need to master re-regulation very seriously. If you get dysregulated, and by dysregulated, I mean a nervous system reaction to stress that people with trauma often get, which leads you to feel discombobulated, numb, emotionally kind of on a roller coaster, like your anger is too much or your sadness is too much or you're too excited about something. It's emotional dysregulation. If you get sick a lot of chronic diseases with no origin, that could be dysregulation. Inability to focus or learn, inability to read the room, like you walk in and you can't really tell what's going on with people. All of that can be dysregulation. And dysregulation has now turned out to be the core symptom that drives so many other trauma symptoms. So if you get dysregulated, you have everything to gain by learning to re-regulate and mastering it on the job and outside of the job. Dysregulation is the reason why you may be getting those productivity crashes where you get some sort of accomplishment, you put yourself out there, you get some accolades, and then, somebody says one little critical word and zoom, you go back down. Dysregulated people are really capable of accomplishing things, but they have a harder time sustaining just kind of a steady progress. There's these crashes of productivity. And if you have those, you may have been trying to hide them on the job, pretending you're sick, not really knowing what's wrong. Before I had healing for my complex PTSD, I would say when something really good happened or I got recognized for something, a promotion, or, in my personal life, like somebody I really liked asked me out, something like that, I could have a productivity crash for 3 days easily. And to this day, if I get really, really upset about something, I can have another productivity crash. If I get dysregulated badly, it takes a certain amount of time to recover my re-regulation. So and this is after 29 years of having skills for this, you can think of how it used to be for me. I mean, I just went months where I could barely read a paragraph. I would read it over and over again. I was faking it. Once I was a passenger in a car and I had a cup of coffee, like a ceramic mug in my hand, and I can't remember what I was talking about with somebody, but what they said made me mad, and I just threw the cup out the window, and the cup smashed, and I remember they pulled the car over and they started crying. It was so upsetting to them. And I was so dysregulated that I didn't predict that would even affect them, that I smashed a cup out the window. It was just this weird, reckless, rough thing to do. And not coincidentally, it was something that my parents used to do, is like break dishes when they were upset. It was in there. So through my daily practice and through re-regulation, I've started to kind of let those old imprints of how to deal with feelings and lashing out like that it started to be rinsed off of me and washed downstream in the experience of my life. And then a new strength comes up inside where I have some balance and some calm inside to draw on when things are rough. And things get rough sometimes. Getting dysregulated at work can also cause you to sort of come off as hostile and intimidating and difficult. And unfortunately, if you have CPTSD and it's active and you haven't yet developed a way to sort of do a self-examination and get some support from somebody who totally cares about you, like maybe a buddy in my daily practice program or a sponsor in 12-step, somebody you trust to sort of, when you can go, is it just me? Like, should I be really angry right now? It really helps to get a second opinion from trusted people, because if you're coming off as very, very difficult, even if people are obliged by law to treat you fairly, it's not fair to them that they would have to work with somebody who's causing so much anxiety. So I'm just going to ask you to look at it that way. It's very difficult to work with somebody who's leading with anger, who's leading with conflict, who's getting emotionally dysregulated on the job and sort of triggering and drawing off of the peaceful well that anybody else has managed to develop. The best way forward, if a job is really terrible and it makes you so angry all the time because it's a bad place for you to work, I encourage you to change jobs. Like, nobody's coming to save you on this. If you want to work in a better environment, it is time for you to start putting your ducks in a row so you can make that change. And if you're choosing to stay in the environment, you may need to assess as difficult things happen, wait a minute, am I being mistreated here? Should I just let it go? Should I just show up and be a good sport? Like, these are the improvisational decisions that we make day after day after day, especially when we're out in the world dealing with people. As you heal your dysregulation, you'll have good judgment about it. You'll have good judgment and you'll have equanimity, magnanimity. This is where you can be just sort of like kind and easygoing with people when they're edgy with you. And often you can be the one who sort of heads off a big conflict of just like, we're cool, okay. Not being a doormat. It's a fine line, isn't it? And this is where people with childhood PTSD can get so jammed up, is there is a conflict. Somebody's not being quite right. They're off in some way. You need to set a boundary. You want to be kind about it. You don't want to be a doormat. And this is where we get very confused. So again, I recommend daily practice to help move the stress thoughts downstream so you can have clear thoughts and lucid decisions about like what to do about the little things that happen every day. And you will be surprised how quickly your life goes from a trajectory that's kind of not going that well to a trajectory that is going so much better because of these little decisions along the way. The little decisions where you kind of handle it. You handle it. You're the reliable person. You're the sturdy person. You're the person with boundaries who says no to mistreatment without a big bunch of fireworks about it. It's just a boundary. I remember I used to run a video production company, and I meditate every day, twice a day. And one of those meditations is somewhere around 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And when you do video production, sometimes you can't, the schedule demands that you keep working quite long into the evening. But I knew, and I had the privilege because I owned the company of just like, I need to meditate or I'm going to start getting grumpy, unfocused, hostile, intimidating, all those things. And I know that I do that, and it brings me back into, lucidity and kind of a goodness of heart and a clear mind. And that's exactly how I want to be doing all my work always. And so I would just be like, about 5 o'clock, I'm going to have us all take a break. I'm going to go meditate. And I set a boundary on that. And people were just like, okay, Anna has to meditate. And I had spent years missing my evening meditation when I was working because I was afraid that I couldn't ask for it or I couldn't try it. And so I just put that out there. You may not own your company right now or have that privilege, but you may be surprised that when you set boundaries in a way that's not trying to put any responsibility on other people, but just like going, I have this thing I need to do. It's now 9 in the morning, and when it gets to be that time, I'm going to need a break to do that. So are we good? Are we good? And then maybe you need to be a little flexible about it, but you get to do the things that help you stay in the frame of mind where you can advance in your career and not just, that's because I'll tell you at 5 o'clock, if I'm not writing and meditating and the stress of video production, if I didn't do it, I turned into the kind of person who did not get another job from the client. I'll say that. So it became totally important that I care for myself. Anyway, it surprised me. People were very glad for me to take care of myself. And not only did they tolerate it, but they respected me for it. They started asking me, so how do you meditate? Where did you learn to do that? Like, it became intriguing to them that somebody took care of themselves right in front of them. All right, a sub area again of dysregulation on the job is it makes it very hard to deal with criticism, and there's just no way around it. Like, if you're going to grow on the job, you have to be open to some level of people telling you how you maybe made a mistake or how you need to do it better. It can also make you vague about discussions of money. It's easy to walk into a job and go, so yeah, I'd like to do the job, and then be like, oh, I should have asked for how much money. I just have no idea. And if you are not somebody who can be comfortable talking about money and own what it is you require, then you are very unlikely to get what you want or deserve. And so dysregulation makes that sort of decision to be able to be honest about what it is you're looking for, and not playing any games, but just saying, I need to be paid this much, or this job isn't going to work for me. To be able to do that with peace in your heart is what re-regulation looks like. Not to be like, oh, I'm preemptively so angry. I never get what I want. Oh, here we go. Oh no, I can't say anything. It's going to come out wrong. It's stupid. Fine, I'll just not say anything. You don't want to be that person. The other thing that you can get very vague about that can really create problems on the job, and dysregulation, this is a big way that dysregulation sabotages people, is you get vague about sexual boundaries. So if you are getting sexually harassed, or let's say that a coworker and you have, an attraction going, and you're hanging out after work and you don't really know, like, is this a date? Is this an attraction? Is this okay at work? Are we going to talk about this? All that stuff. To get vague about it at work is so shooting yourself in the foot. Work is a place where you need to be very, very clear about where you're coming from, and you need to be clear where other people are coming from. And I know that it is a tricky dance to be able to clarify these things, that you could really put people on the spot. You could make them feel threatened. Maybe you're not ready to do that yet. But I urge you, do not get vague about your boundaries, about sex, attraction, hanging out with people who you think maybe are hitting on you. That is some place to say, and this is where being re-regulated helps. You can just say, oh, thanks, this feels like a date. I wouldn't want to do that. You can say it in the nicest way so that if there's any hope that you can set your boundary without the other person freaking out, which is what bad people do, right, when they're confronted with boundaries. It happens at work, obviously. But if you possibly can, you set your boundaries in the nicest possible way so that you're not part of any conflict. And most people will say, oh, yeah, that's not where I was coming from, and the whole thing evaporates. Even in your personal life, if you have vague and confusing relationships with people where you're like, is this a date, or is this are we flirting? Are you cheating on your spouse? Like, what's going on here? Where you don't know, there's a magic power that you always have with you, and it's honesty. When there's like magic pixie dust all over everything, like, I don't know, we're just not going to say anything about what's really going on here because it will ruin the moment, or I'll feel embarrassed, or then you'll know, or it'll become obvious that this is not sustainable. Like, those are things that we do when we have trauma wounds. This is also what people do in limerence, is keep it vague, because to have it be concrete would be to have it be something that you must say no to. It's not real. It's not legitimate. You will get rejected. So we keep it vague, and we get too good at that. But that is the kind of thing that will bite you in the butt at work. You do not want to be vague about these things. The ideal scenario, though, is where you hold your boundaries at work. You don't get too into it with people. If you have to explain yourself, you're already losing your boundary. If you have to, you can go to your support people outside of work to process the emotions and have a cry and deal with all the feelings that come up around it. The fourth trauma zone that can come and hold back your advancement at work is the other people in your life. Usually it would be a partner who are just messed up enough to sabotage the impression you make at work. And that could be everything from the controlling and abusive partner at home. It could be people who continue to have drama in their own life, and you get calls all the time and you have to take them to the emergency room. Or You have a home life that you invest a lot of energy into hiding from people at work, and that may be appropriate, but when it's draining your energy all the time of what's going on at home, maybe you have a partner with an addiction, maybe you have a marriage that's falling apart, maybe you have a kid who's in great difficulty, and I know how complicated those situations can be, but I would be leaving something big out if I didn't acknowledge that having troubled people in your home life can sabotage you at work. So I hope you can do everything you need to do to have a little bit of separation from that. Coming to work with what I call an emotional hangover. I never was much of a drinker, but I would get into such emotional scrapes and difficulties with people that I would come to work late with a terrible migraine, looking awful, having cried all night, eyes all puffy. And it was functionally, I had to admit, like being an alcoholic with a hangover. And it used to happen too much because of the kinds of relationships that I had before I had trauma healing and when I still didn't know how to get re-regulated. It's just such a relief now in post-healing life. I talk about it like it's all done. I mean, so much progress. Luckily, it continues, so I don't even know where it's going next. But I wake up in the morning every day, okay. And it's a great asset to being able to open up my heart and my life to new opportunities and things that are hard for me. Like everything that I've ever done as Crappy Childhood Fairy, at some point it was new, like putting my first video up on YouTube. It took so much courage. And I'm working on a book now and I have an agent, and trying to do all of that is it takes courage. I could never do it if I had an emotional hangover as often as I used to. So that's another reason. Like so many people with complex PTSD, my early career looked a lot like a roller coaster with great accomplishments and then big descents, giving up, quitting things, crashing and burning. And it wasn't just productivity, but it had a lot to do with people who I chose as partners. And twice I ended up with men who had active, serious drug addictions. In both cases, I didn't realize it at first. And one of them had a relapse after a couple years into the relationship. One of them had been secretly using the whole time. And it was absolutely devastating to my career both times. Both times, my career derailed. It was very stigmatizing to me. There was no way I could continue to hide it. We're talking serious drugs and terrible consequences of what happened to them. When I started to have boundaries about who got into my life, which involved making a decision that it was okay with me if I was single forever, a single mom at that point, I would be single forever, but I would never again have that level of drama of an active addict in my life. My career couldn't help but go up because I stopped having this crazy, intense drama going on all the time. And so if you've never had a drama-free life and been able to go to work like that with your own optimism or energy, or maybe you don't like the job that day, but just to basically have your wits and your emotions in their little cubby holes when you arrive at work, you're going to be so pleasantly surprised how much energy and bandwidth you have that's all for you to be able to accomplish what you want. It's fantastic. That is one of the gifts of healing. All right, a fifth way, trauma area that will stop you from getting ahead at work is choosing jobs and bosses who match your terrible family of origin, right? How many times have you done that? Like constantly. Brings out the worst in you when you do that. Like you may be able to get a lot of healing with your parent, but there's a reason why we get some distance from those toxic dynamics. And if you're not healed yet, you will have a tendency to choose bosses and coworkers and work environments that have some sort of like mimicking yuckiness about them, like what you grew up with. So for me, I would say the bosses, I've had some good bosses. I haven't had a boss in like 23 years, but I had clients. And one of the hardest things that I kept getting into was clients or bosses with significant drinking problems, like my mom, drugs and alcohol problems. And I get around that energy and it's like kryptonite, where I feel very angry, I feel shut down, I feel very snippy. I'm not pleasant and I'm not very visionary. And it ends up using up about 60% of my vital force, just to cope with somebody who's high. And it's not good for me. I don't want to be around it. It's just one of those things I had to make a conscious decision. I will not work with people who I feel are drunk or high. And so many bad memories there. The other negative tendency that I would tend to gravitate towards is bosses who really underestimated me. Now, being a consultant is nice. When you're freelancing, they think highly enough of you to employ you, and it may not last forever. You may not get a second job with them. But if it's spread out a little bit, you get to really work on your professional skills without falling into a parent-child relationship with your boss. And I think there's a subtle way of doing that. I get letters from people, or I've coached people where they're like, my boss invalidates me, my boss plays favorites, and I'm just like, oh, bad situation, bad situation. Sometimes I think the only thing for it is to get out of a job like that. Sometimes healing is possible, but if you're dealing with a dynamic that you grew up with, and you're not very far along your path of healing your trauma symptoms, being around the stuff that hurt you in the first place can just really take you down. So I recommend making a conscious decision about the kind of boss and coworkers that would be good for you and seeking it out and being willing to take the time to find that. And look, I started in this video telling you I had to clean houses while I was young, just to get by. I've had all kinds of jobs that were hard and that I just had to do for money. And I know it's like that, but we're all hoping for something a little better, right? We want to get onto where we feel fulfilled, where we're using our talents and gifts, where we're getting paid well enough to be financially okay. That's a very nice thing to have. It feels good to do the absolute best job you can do. And one thing that comes as a shock to people is that when you're in a job and you work for a boss or a company or a project, your job is to make that entity, that person, that organization, that group as successful as you can. So when you're in a parent dynamic with the parent who hurt you, your objective becomes something very different than, making them successful. And that may sound very self-sacrificing to you. It's not. When you make your boss successful, you rise up. If your boss doesn't recognize that that's valuable and reward you, either it's not a place that has a better place for you, or it's not a place that's willing to give that to you, and that's not a good environment. So if I had my whole career to do over again, and what I tell my coaching clients is, be brave about envisioning a step forward, a step up, a step out. And if you can't get it from where you are right now, then you have to do the very triggering and dysregulating act of finding something new and quitting the old job. But you can now do that without a big conflict or fireworks or rancor, that it's just a positive step that people take, and it's okay, and you deserve it. And when you learn to master re-regulation from your dysregulation, it becomes natural. Be sure you surround yourself with people who get it, that you have people with whom you can be honest. At first, I had this in 12-step programs. Then I started to have it around people who had complex PTSD. And that's one thing I love about our membership program is everybody's working on this stuff. Everybody's kind of working off the same playbook about how to do it. Everybody's hopping on Zoom together. Our members create their own Zoom calls to do the daily practice together. They have buddy relationships. Anyway, I was turning into an ad for that. But if you really wanted to be around people who are walking this path of improving their lives, come check it out. There's a link always down below in the description section for my membership program or on my website. So with that, I wish you well. I wish you every bit of freedom from the oppression and suppression of the past, what people did to you, and the ways that you've held yourself back since then too, so that the best in you, so that everything you're capable of can come forward and shine. It's not just because that's what will make you happy. It's because we need you. The world depends on all of us becoming our full and real selves and to be able to bring our best to everything we do. If you have a history of trauma, I know you know how much it can come back and trigger thoughts and behaviors and limits that hurt your work life, that drag down your hopes of advancement in your career. Hardly anybody talks about this, and I don't know why. It's such an important part of life. Of course, the symptoms of childhood PTSD can hold you back at work. And I'm going to walk through some ways it does that and how you can turn it around. Not just so that you have a fair chance at success and professional fulfillment in your life, and of course, financial security, hello, but because doing work that's meaningful to you, feeling some sense of accomplishment, some personal growth through your work, It's part of how to build a happy life. Now, at any level, work can be stabilizing. It can be a path to overcome the chaos of your childhood. It can be a way to overcome poverty. It's certainly been that for me. And work connects you to the world. And I know some jobs are horrible. I've had some of those too. I know what it's like to have to do work you hate just because you need the money to survive. But work gets us up in the morning. It draws us out into the world, into interactions with other people. It can be a second chance to learn how life works. And it can be a place where you come into your own, where you blossom. Now, even if you don't have that now, even if work is so triggering for you, you're just like, locking yourself in, there is a path out. And I encourage you to set your sight on that path. Working is a large part of life, and even when work is menial, our engagement with it can be healing and uplifting. It can be a way to bring more good into the world, and that's really important too. So how do you do that? How can a person with a history of trauma rise up like that to become a person who finds joy on the job, who becomes an agent of goodness and of usefulness, who brings peace and comfort and order to environments that would otherwise be, hard-hearted or chaotic? Work is a way you can encourage other people, and they need that. Work is one place where parts of who you really are can show up. And of course, work is a way, to get money. Let's talk about money. Money is how you have choices. Anyone who's ever been stuck and broke without work does not romanticize money. Of like, oh, money, it's just evil. It's like, no, money is choice. Money is survival, and then money brings choices. Without money, you can be stuck in a terrible situation. You could be trapped in a bad relationship. So it's so important to learn how you can generate money through work so that always, no matter what's going on in your life, you're fulfilled and you have choices. All right. So what are some of the childhood PTSD symptoms that can show up at work and hold you back? Number one, you end up working for people in organizations that untraumatized people would know not to work for. They're people who are abusive, dishonest, exploitative. It's not safe. And there is this tendency in people who grew up having to to fit themselves to unacceptable situations at home, to be just too good at it. It's time to stop. Stop fitting yourself to bad things. Begin to get clear about what your standards are, about what is an appropriate, good, decent, workable situation where you can do your job. What kind of people do you need to work for? Get clear about this. This is one of my symptoms of CPTSD, is feeling like I just get sort of like buffeted around and end up in jobs like the only job that came along in the little that I was able to look for a job because I was really depressed, or, the first place that hired me. In my life, I've paid the price for not exercising choice. And I've ended up in situations where I was really unhappy, and I spent all my energy kind of pushing back against the thing I didn't like about the job, rather than going, I don't like this job, I'll go somewhere else. And luckily, ever since I've been in the process of healing my trauma, which is basically like 29 years now, I've been coming up and up and up. So things that fit me when I was younger, less experienced, but also still really underneath the weight of my trauma symptoms, well, I'm in a different league now, and I've been in progressively better leagues all along, where I could learn to, I could do good customer service now that I don't have loss of control of my emotional, state, just because I'm triggered. I have a way to, compartmentalize that, put it aside, deliver the good customer service, and then go off and use my tools to deal with the dysregulation that happens. So you can really change your station in life by learning to work with your own symptoms. But for gosh sakes, do not get into work situations that are only going to make it worse. And don't kid yourself that just staying in a bad situation at work, that just staying there, well, okay, I know the thing that you should have, you should keep your job until you've got another one lined up. I know that. But you have to weigh that against what happens to your spirit and your psyche when you sit there and take abuse. And what happens, and this is true in romantic relationships and just bad situations in general, you get eroded when you tolerate bad situations like that, bad treatment. It wears you down until, you'd be at a job interview and you'd be like, hi, I know I'm not worth very much, but I thought I'd try. You can't bring that energy and spirit that you need for the job interview. So staying in the job isn't everything. And I know money is always a consideration, but please take care of your spirit so that abuse doesn't wear you down to the point that you can't even try to take your step onward and out. Number 2, you end up working for someone who is funnily very similar to your abusive parent. And you fall into the same role that you once played in response to that person, whether that's people-pleasing, overworking, rebelling against them, getting resentful or immobilized, or suffering because you're not seen. That was my thing. I wasn't really seen by my mom, and I just kept getting bosses who would just completely overlook me. And no, they were not reading my mind or looking out for my best interest. And I later learned what you have to do. You have to ask for the raise. You have to state what you feel that you would like to be doing and how much you should be paid for it. And then if they won't do it, you go somewhere else. I didn't do that for a long time because I was very insecure about whether I deserved more. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Sometimes, though, not working for the type of person can help you not play your old role. So, CPTSD symptoms are sticky like that. So that role, the role where I become like the long-suffering, overlooked Cinderella that I had in my family of origin, they all get to go to the ball. I have to stay home and scrub the chimney or whatever. It's a little bit of a metaphor for what it was like for me, but I kept playing that role in jobs. Literally, everybody went off to a conference once, a conference that I was really probably the person who most should have been at it. And when they came back, they said, here, transcribe the recording. I remember that. There was a moment of clarity. I'm like, I'm out of here. This is wrong. But I had enough healing. I think that was maybe 3-4 years into my healing when I was like, wait a minute, this isn't right. I actually am really good. It's a long story, but I wrote a book on the topic of the conference and nobody else had. And yeah, it was actually a bad dynamic with the boss. The boss who had some sort of I don't know. I don't even know what. I don't even need to know. I think it was competition or sexism. Who knows? I just know I needed to not work there anymore, and now I don't. So, yay. Okay, this is number 3. The person you work for is actually fine, but you parentify them anyway, waiting for them to realize how good you are. And feeling jealous of the favor that they show to other people, waiting for them to give you better duties and a raise. You don't ever advocate for yourself, and you end up resentful and not giving your best. So this is another version of the abusive parent, but how about, the boss is fine, but the old parent dynamic, you're coming up and projecting your half of it. There's no way I'm going to be treated fairly. There's no way my needs are going to be met. They're against me. I can't. So when that's operating, that can really hold you back too. Nobody has any idea that that's going on in your head, but they're soon going to notice the outward manifestations, the way that you kind of resist and hunch up against growth and opportunities or questions or difficulty. And so, I always want to remind people, it makes sense sometimes to contain your feelings and to behave and to be appropriate even when your thoughts are inappropriate. You know that you can't get away with expressing them. But the thing is, we all have a nervous system. So in a way, you can't really hide what's going on. People can feel it. And just for example, when somebody's really angry and then you go, is something wrong? You seem angry. And they go, no, I'm not angry. You know they are. If your nervous system works, you can feel it. I've heard theories that our nervous systems are like one giant organism, really, and in a way that makes sense to me. That's how we have collective conscience, perhaps. That's how sometimes we have intuition about others. We actually have some form of connection that may or may not be, if it's physical, it's on some atomic level. I don't know what it is, but I just know I can't hide how I really feel. And so the healing has to happen for me to be perceived as not angry, as not terrified. I have to honestly be who I present myself to be. That said, I totally believe that sometimes you fake it till you make it. Sometimes you act as if. Sometimes you pretend you're brave and you start your first day of a new job, even though it is frightening and there's a lot of doubts and all that. So sometimes we do that. But just remember, people can sense it. Here's the thing. This is about parentifying your boss. Do not parentify your boss. They're not your parent. The other thing about parentifying your boss is it's a disordered dynamic right there. Because this is actually a contractual agreement. Now, a lot of times it becomes like family on a job, but it's a little different than a family. in that they can fire you and that's it. You know, that's all. They can fire you, or there's so many things that can happen there that are not like a family. But a lot of times, because we have fuzzy boundaries, because our emotional needs weren't met in our families, then that sort of need for a family kind of goes in and weaves its tendrils into the whole job situation. And what happens is, if you're not treated fairly, if you're not invited to stay on another year, it can be devastating, as if you've been cast out of your family, which could have already happened in your actual family, right? So it's devastating for a person with those wounds from a family. So the way to head it off is to learn to have kinds of relationships and to be very clear with yourself through doing your homework, using your tools, having the support of a mentor. I really encourage you to do that. Tools and mentor, very potent combination. I can talk about that later in this video. But you want to do that so that you approach the job with actually a realistic dynamic, that you bring half of that dynamic in, of like, this is a contractual arrangement. I have made an agreement with you that you will pay me if I do this job. And if I do this job well, that's one thing. And if I do this job badly, that's another thing. And if I would like to advance in this career, if I would like to get a raise, I really want to do the job well. I want to have a good relationship, but not one where I'm emotionally melting down, acting on, like, opening the portals of hell to those old childhood wounds and behaving as a rejected child. I was a rejected child. And I have brought that energy to work, and it doesn't make sense at work. And it's a very difficult position to put somebody in. And it's not something that tends to get you a raise or advancement. So, you know, I can predict the comments from people who are feeling hurt by this and just feel like, but it's not fair. And I'm just going to say, yes, it is fair. A job is a contractual agreement. And if you've been at a job a long time, there are family-like bonds there of loyalty. But in the end, a business has to look out for itself, and sometimes at the expense of its people. That's how it works. And it's hard, but it's how it is. And how it is a very good thing to be able to see, recognize, and work with. So other bonds are more permanent. Other bonds have other obligations, to stick with you through thick and thin, to love you even if you can't do your job. That's a different bond. So there's so much, my career was so liberated and set free. Like, I was very stuck. I've often told people here, I couldn't get a job at McDonald's when I was 16. And I often got jobs because of my smarts, but a lot of because of the emotional energy I brought to jobs, and that made me difficult, unreliable, kind of a handful at work. I didn't get along with some people a little too much of the time. I did not advance. They couldn't put me in charge of things. And so I often had this beautiful luxury of being able to create a job for myself, but it never involved moving up. And there was a real ceiling on how much money I could make. And that was not acceptable, because for 9 years I was a single mom. I had to have enough money to get by. I had to do it. And so I did something different that when I learned this lesson, and I left that job. I went and got this other job, and this was I was very surprised. I got a 50% raise when I got a different job from the job that I had been, very miserable and feeling stuck. Then later I went back to the old job and got another raise that was effectively double what I had made there in the past. And it was actually appropriate for my level and my education and for what I was contributing. The place that I was working, if you were to ask me now, I wish I hadn't gone back there. Yes, I got money, but I was still working for the same people who didn't think I was worth it, who complained, who didn't give me opportunities. And there were so many ways that job was like having a terrible boyfriend. I used to say that it's kind of like having a boyfriend who won't commit, and you've had children already and they still won't commit and they won't help out, and they won't, that's what it's like, well, that's interesting, because that's what was going on in my real private life. That's what was going on. And that's what happens. Unhealed trauma leads us into trauma-driven behaviors that are just going to keep playing out as that thing that is unhealed. So I had not healed that part of me that it's hard to define. Like, why would I do that? Why would I get into a relationship and have kids with a guy who wouldn't commit to me? Why would I do that? It was a lot like the dynamics in my home. I didn't have that kind of like diehard commitment from my mom, and my dad, my birth dad, who did feel that way about me, died when I was a teenager. And so, I don't know, I just kept crap fitting myself. That was one area that I could crap fit really well, and so I did. And I was very driven by a fear, like, I'm never going to have anything. I should just take what I can get, job-wise, partner-wise. I should just take what I can get. And it all worked out. I'm very happy now, and my life is full, and I have kids, and you know, they're adult kids now. And so healing, you know, it's funny how our healed life can work with us wherever we come from. It can work with whatever wounds there are, and life can unfold and be wonderful anyway. So don't worry. Don't worry if you've got problems right now. Don't worry if you're stuck in old patterns. But listen to me, because I'm telling you a list of things at work that can really hold you down. And you can start changing those even if you don't have everything worked out in your life. All right, you ready for another one? Okay, this is kind of an extension of the last one. And this is where, you know, you've sort of slipped into a family dynamic at your job, and all of your energy is about trying to make them get it about you, where what you can do with that energy is to take it and improve your skills and your knowledge and your options. And I can't stress this enough. Like, evidently, this is what normal parents teach their kids. So I'm teaching you now, having gone through this cycle and you know, moved through and had these opportunities finally open up to me. But it came from, you know, I went and got a master's degree. And I actually didn't use that master's degree. It was very fancy, and I thought it was what I wanted. But when I worked there, that was the job I really didn't like, and I wasn't really using it. And one thing led to another, and I've ended up creating 3 different businesses for myself. And I recommend this. If you have CPTSD and family dynamics have a way of leaking into your workplace, I just found having my own business and having clients that I served was a lot more clean and straightforward, and not like a parent. Not like a family. I sign an agreement with somebody. I work for them for a couple of months. I used to do customer service training as a consultant. Then I had a video production company, and now I do Crappy Childhood Fairy, and you're my client. And so when I work directly with people like that and not through an employer doing something, it just really works for me, and it's motivating to me. And if it ever goes south, which sometimes it does, I've had some very icky clients before, well, then you just don't work with them again. It's so cool. So you have a lot more mobility to keep making, you know, if you're a person who's changing dramatically because you're healing your past trauma, doing consulting and changing clients often is a way that you can kind of keep upping your game and not waiting for somebody else to decide if they're going to give you, you know, a promotion. That's never worked for me. That's never worked for me. In my younger days, I was a comedian in Hollywood. And before that, I had been trying to make it in acting, right? And I never did. I feel like I could really act now, but but when I was doing that, I had to wait for somebody to think I was the right person. And they'd be like, you have kind of a character face and da-da-da, and you should get your nose fixed. You know, everything that I would ever have would be decided by somebody else. And I was like, you know what happens with comedians? They write their own ticket. They write the role for themselves, and anybody can get up on stage and do comedy. So these are just some examples of twists and turns in my career where I kept discovering where I could bring all my potential to bear. I think that my upbringing, I think that my trauma symptoms had really diminished and marked me as somebody not quite suitable for things that I actually was capable of. I had a lot of growth to do. And I have set myself free. And honestly, Crappy Childhood Fairy, everything I told you of the work that I've done before, it all came together into this job. So you never know. If you keep working on yourself and your skills. By the way, that video production company, I had to teach myself to edit on Google. I Googled, how do you edit video? That's how I did it. And then I started charging money for it. And I got people to pay me. And eventually I hired a staff. But I still, to this day, I do know how to edit video. I taught myself how to do it. So when people say, oh, I don't have an education, I'm like, okay, education is a thing. It's valuable. It's real. But if you need money right now, there are things you can teach yourself on this thing that we're on right now, which is the most powerful source of learning there has ever been in human history. There's quirks that I could complain about YouTube, but it's all here. Like everything that you want to know how to do, it's here. And if you're motivated, you can teach yourself. So don't waste energy on some crappy boss who doesn't get you. Put your energy into learning things that you can either finally get recognized there or go somewhere where you are recognized. Like work is a joy. Work can be a wonderful way forward. I gave you a big speech about it at the beginning of this video about like, money is important, and it doesn't stop there. What's important is that connection to the world, that feeling of usefulness, the feeling of having somewhere you need to be every day because people are counting on you. These are the ingredients of happiness. I'm still talking about things that can hold you back and then what to do. So here's another one that can hold you back. And this may not apply to you, but it sure applies to a lot of people who had trauma. You're in a line of work that's like loaded with traumatized people. All right. So I used to work in a nonprofit that was about a political thing that was very divisive. Very life and death, very intense. And one day I realized that about 80% of the people who worked there were adult children of alcoholics like me. And when adult children of alcoholics haven't healed, that's a really common symptom, is being very excited by drama, conflict, drama, playing the good guy and getting in there. And, I'm glad there are good guys out there doing this stuff, but it was a really sick environment for me. And when I healed, I had to get out of that office, because being around all that like trauma drama energy and just like, oh my God, you're not going to believe what Congress did today. I was just like, oh, bleh, I want to get out. And then I used to like the show ER, and I just like didn't anymore. I'm totally into shows that are high drama now. But when I was in my early recovery, I couldn't watch TV. It was all about adrenaline. And it was just so funny because they were acting out these like terrible scenarios where you're just like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And then I was about a year into recovery where I realized this was stressing me out. It was draining me. And what I was really seeking through my recovery was to have less drama, more calm, more just like connection to things, more awareness. So trauma and fear as entertainment has its place, right? It's like horror movies and roller coasters. I've loved all of those things in due time. And I used to think, how when rock and rollers get old and they're like 80 and they do songs about like, I like to sit on the porch. It's a nice sunset. And I used to think, oh God, I never want to be like that. Well, now I'm like that. Now I'm like that. I like songs that bring me peace and sort of help me appreciate life. So we are where we are. Okay. What I'm saying about the professions, though, trauma-driven professions, emergency services person, you're out there in the ambulance dealing with wrecks. A lot of people who are nurses, especially nurses in like a trauma unit or an ER, I don't need to tell you, very, very highly populated with people who grew up with trauma. And the fact is, most people find those jobs inhibiting to their ability to start changing their level of dysregulation. So that's a dilemma, right? You were drawn to it initially, and now it's starting to be an obstacle. But if you change careers midway, you'd be like me and a lot of other people. It's okay to change careers, and a lot of times what you've done before is so helpful for educating people about some reality that you've worked in, personally about stuff. Like I did. I worked in public health for 30 years. I know a lot about that. I know how to talk to people who work in public health. I know the sensibility. I know the way funding works there and how that can drive the agenda. I know how to work outside of that while being respectful to it. So this is a skill too, is being somewhere and leaving it. And you can do that. All right, here's a characteristic that can get in the way of your career success. This one's kind of general. Trauma response, okay? Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Fight, that's where you get very argumentative and high conflict. Flight, you escape, you run away, you drink, whatever. Fight, flight, freeze. Freeze is you just take crap, you don't do anything about it. And fawn is you're like, oh, let me try to make you feel better. I'm sorry you're mad at me, let me fix it. Okay, so those are 4 trauma responses. There may be others, right? Fix. Other things that start with F. That's a trauma response, right? I won't go there. But your trauma responses are too strong. So when work is stressful, which it can be, your trauma responses come off and it's just too strong. You're too argumentative. You're too escapist. You don't show up for work. You call in sick when the going gets tough. You freeze. You take all this abuse and you don't change jobs, or you fawn. You keep trying to make them like you and see you and get you. See how I'm talking about trauma responses through all of this? So that's kind of a general one. I probably should have said this in the introduction, but that's a thing that can get in your way. So trauma responses, they're natural. You want to we all have all of them at times, and we tend to favor 1 or 2 of them. And you want to come back to center on that. So that instead of having a trauma response, when you feel hurt and upset by something, your trauma response happens, you have a way to separate, process that, heal it, calm it down, and then show up again at work, not delivering them your trauma response, but your solution, whether that's to leave, defend yourself, advocate for yourself, you know, quiet quit. Yeah, quiet quitting sounds terrible to me. What a waste of life that is. If you're going to work, make the most of it. That's my philosophy. Okay. Number 7 is you haven't learned to manage your trauma symptoms. So to hide them, you're keeping your life small. All right, so I talk a lot about like playing small, right? So your trauma symptoms, before you have any recovery, they mess up everything. They ruin your opportunities. They make you look foolish, sad, crazy. You know, they thwart you from getting what you want. So one way you can control your trauma symptoms is by keeping your life small. Don't go for jobs that are challenging. Don't be around people. Be alone. Do something really unchallenging in isolation. That's what we do, right? I'm not really exaggerating. That's what we do. We're just doing jobs that are so easy or so repetitive that you can just do that. Now, I think an easy, repetitive job can be very therapeutic when you're in a certain place, but it's not suitable for your whole life. It's not suitable. And just like isolating, sometimes you need some time alone, but isolating for your whole life is not a great idea. And yes, I hear the chorus of people who say, no, it's great, isolating's great, I really don't want to do it. But you're so busted because you watch my videos, so I know you're working on yourself. And I'm teaching you about relational stuff. So even if you're a person who loves solitude, learning this relational stuff is powerful and good stuff, and hang in there. There are aspects of life, and if you don't believe me now, when you're old and you need some help to take care of yourself, or you're sick, you will see what I'm saying about how important it is to have people in your life. It's important. This is a big one. We could talk on and on and on about this. Number 8 is emotional dysregulation. All right? This is probably the number one thing that gets in the way of your advancement, because emotional dysregulation wrings you out. It can leave you with something very similar in your body to a hangover because you were crying all night or you were having a big argument the night before. And when you have drama in your private life, it can leak into your work life. So even if you keep it all together at work, like I think I was pretty good at that. I think I would lash out sometimes, but the drama I was having in my private life was showing up in my face and in the time I arrived at work and my bedraggled persona. Like I said, our nervous systems are connected, and so people could tell I was in great distress. And they were kind and supportive of me, but they did not promote me. So I really did work with mostly very kind people. But I couldn't get ahead and use my talents because I just could not keep out of the terrible problems that I was having on my own time. So emotional re-regulation, this is going to be your friend no matter what part of your life you're working on right now. Your work, your relationships, your parenting, your neighbors, all of it will require emotional re-regulation. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But what you really need, because all that dysregulation, it takes your productivity and you have these bursts of productivity and then it goes down. It's like a roller coaster, right? Productivity like a roller coaster. So sometimes you can get away with that, and there's some types of work where bursts is sufficient, that you can come in and just like deliver like crazy. Some people are very, very good at creating order out of a bunch of papers or processes, and that's a gift too. So there are many gifts, and you can never really be 100% certain that you have exactly this one, but your job is to start noticing where is that feedback that what you do benefits others. You get to do a lot of things just for yourself. You have a lot of talents and skills, but the gift is the thing that connects you to your greater purpose to be of service to this world in the best possible way. And you'll be clumsy with it, and you won't have it right initially. Like you'll be on a path all your life to go towards what it is. Some people are very lucky and they find it early. It took me a long time. I'm living it right now in what I'm doing right now. And it just is so much happier. There's so much more abundant energy every day to do it because it just feels like what I'm made to do. And everybody deserves to have that. Healing trauma is essential for you to discover that in yourself. So whatever you do for a living, and when I was first learning this, I saw a parking lot attendant. They weren't even the attendant. They were the guy who sweeps the parking lot and just gets the fallen leaves out of it. And they were so kind and uplifting. And it was at a hospital. I had a long period where I was in and out of the hospital. And I would enjoy so much seeing this parking lot guy because he was kind and friendly to me, and he would sort of help me change I think he might have been a healer, actually. I'd be going into the hospital for some dreadful thing. I'm fine now. But I'd be going in and he'd be like, hey, how's it going? And there was this funny way he sort of changed my whole attitude to like, I'm so grateful that I have health care to deal with this problem. My whole attitude would change. He wouldn't lecture me. He didn't say it. He just emanated it. And through working in a parking lot, which I'm sure was not the best paid job, he exhibited joy and optimism that was transmissible, and I received that. I met a lot of really gifted people when I was in and out of the hospital. But if you've ever been in the hospital, they don't all have that. It can be rough. Sometimes some people are just like mean. They're mean and they don't care. I don't know. It's a mixed bag out there, but my growth in healing is where I stopped focusing so much on how somebody was mean once to me in the hospital, or well, more than once, okay, and more on, I admire these people so much. I want to be like that. I want to develop the things in myself where I'm that person for somebody else, and they start to have that experience of having their attitude lifted because of some incidental contact with me, even when I don't know I'm doing it. Like, wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Narcissists have this devious way of sneaking up on you and injecting problems and self-doubt into your life. And it's almost like they put a spell on you. And people tell me this over and over again, that it can take a long time to finally realize that you are not causing all the pain and chaos that they're bringing into your life. That you're not a bad person or some kind of loser who's so bad that you can't even see how you're causing these problems. Because the truth is, they are causing the problems. You're probably not the only person in their orbit who's hurting and attacking themselves. But when the day comes that you finally can see the truth, that this person is selfish and fickle and messing with you just to keep their ego afloat, and you set a boundary, well, look out. Because yes, while this will break the spell, temporarily at least, for you, the resulting abuse that narcissists tend to unload is going to be aimed at you. And this is when the temptation to fall back into subservience to them and into self-attack are going to kick in. So my letter today is from a woman I'll call Sibel. And she writes, Dear Anna, I'm now struggling with a lot of anger and frustration because lately I understood, with the help of my therapist and my good friend, that one of my colleagues has been abusive to me for almost 5 years. My therapist suggested that this colleague may have borderline personality disorder. But the question is, how is it possible that I haven't noticed that there was something wrong with her, and I let her abuse me verbally and emotionally for so many years? I've got this fairy pencil here. I'm going to circle things I want to come back to on a second reading, but let's read through just to see what Sibel is telling us. What's the story here? She says, I can understand that I was focused on surviving, but I was always letting her back into my life. It's so out of my character. I usually get rid of people who hurt me immediately. More likely that I would get rid of somebody too early rather than too late. And I lost so many good people this way. But she stuck with me and poisoned my life for half a decade. Wow. At first, she tried hard to be my friend. I was at her job interview, and she always told me I made such a good impression on her. I have to admit that she became the friend I needed at the time. I felt very lonely and wounded after being bullied in my previous workplace. What's more, we were both immigrants, so it felt like we had many things in common. Later, we started hanging out outside work, and we shared some of our personal stories. We both grew up in dysfunctional homes. I had a narcissistic father, and she was abandoned by her alcoholic mother. After this nice start, she was only criticizing me. She constantly told me that I was a negative and toxic person and that I needed to work on myself. And you know, it landed on the proper ground, as I am always depressed. And she told me these things to, quote, help me so I would understand what I needed to change. I believed her because she was so optimistic and vibrant. I thought people liked her, but then she had these bad days, and when it was her bad day, it was everybody's bad day. I love that. That is, did you make that up? That is just brilliant. When it was her bad day, it was everybody's bad day. Sometimes when I came to work sleepy or just tired, she'd get mad at me because I brought negative energy. She claimed that she would feel my constant mood swings because she was so sensitive and affected by my negativity. She loved spirituality, personal growth, and quoting famous people, and she wanted good vibes only. I thought something was profoundly wrong with me, and she was the only generous person trying to help me, but I was never good enough and could never fulfill her expectations. Whenever I needed some distance from her, she would immediately stop talking to me, and she started hanging out with somebody else to show me how popular she was. Then she would be passive-aggressive or even openly aggressive. I'll never forget this situation when we met at our colleagues' dinner after many weeks of the silent treatment. She started asking people what their zodiac signs were. She could tell something nice about each sign, of course, but when it was my turn, she said Gemini is the most two-faced, unstable zodiac sign, and nothing good can come out of it. She said it so viciously that I can't forget it. Then after a few days, she would start talking to me as if nothing had ever happened, and we were friends again. She was constantly afraid I was gossiping because I was taking a coffee break with somebody else. She said once, "I don't know what you're talking about with that guy," and she was calling me a gossip girl because people liked me. She was talking negative stuff about anyone who was hanging out with me. When she asked me what this or that person said, I would say something like, "Oh, you know, he's having a bad time," or "she needed to talk." This would set her off. I felt like she was punishing me by keeping secrets. And I think it was revenge for the fact that I refused to tell her stuff about other people. So when I went back to college, she signed up for college too. When I mentioned that I would take time off at the end of August, guess what? In 2 hours, I would get a message from our boss that she took some time off at the end of August. I felt like I was in never-ending competition with her, even if I didn't know what this competition was about and what the rules were. On the one hand, she was thanking me for teaching her everything at work. On the other, it felt like she hated the fact that I was better at work. Every now and then, she would give me the silent treatment for no reason. For some reason, it would happen each September, plus some extra occasions across the year. The first years, I tried to do everything to regain her friendship. Then I changed my tactics and I just let her be. But I felt that the tension was rising each day. At the end of this cycle, she'd take me to a small conference room at the office and pour all the crap on me. In the first years, I'd apologized and felt crap for a few days after. Only 2 years ago, I defended myself this one time. I said she was the gossiper and the manipulator, and everyone feels like walking on eggshells around her. And then I added something like, "I don't care what you think about me. You don't need to hang out with me, and we don't need to talk ever again. I don't care." And then she started crying and apologizing and said she had a tough time. I forgave her. I felt sorry for her, so I even hugged her and said that everything would be all right, and she never took me to a conference room again. But the silent treatment was repeated a few more times. All this time, I thought I deserved her unacceptable treatment. 6 months ago, she was relocated overseas. I was happy and anxious, but still happy. My other colleagues told me she sucked at work, and nobody wanted to work with her apart from me. Nobody came to her goodbye party either. Maybe I'm crazy to think that, but coincidentally, she came to visit us last month. She stayed here a week. That was my last week in this company. I feel that it was her final attempt to get me because she heard I was leaving for good. Of course, there were some silly excuses for her to have a business trip, but frankly, it was nothing she couldn't do from overseas. And why I think she did it on purpose, because I believe she lived in some alternative reality. She applied different rules to her life. She was fighting imaginary fights with imaginary enemies. There were no limits for her to take revenge, so I wouldn't be surprised if she convinced the managers that she needed to come back for that 1 week. I was her friend, so I knew her secrets too, but that was the moment when I took control, and I totally ignored her presence at the office. I was proud of myself. I regret so many things that happened between us. Why couldn't I just let her be? I lost my time and energy trying to fix the relationship with her. She took a lot of happiness from me. Now I'm losing my time ruminating. Yeah. Also, now I see that I lost many valuable friendships at that workplace because I was so focused on her. I have many regrets now, and I don't know how to convince myself that I did the best I could. because I didn't. There were 120 other people at that office to hang out with, and I still focused on the most toxic person there. Is there a way to make sure that the next time I will focus on the right people? Next week, I'm starting in a new place. I don't want to end up with a crazy maker ever again. Thank you. Okay, Sibel. What a story. I'm so glad you're out. This is great. I have a feeling you're going to do very well. I have a feeling you're going to do very well, that I hear a lot of healing in how you describe this, a lot of recognition. You don't sound like somebody kind of stuck in this story anymore, but I get it. It's hard to process, like, why did I do this? So let's just break this down. Okay. You have a therapist, great. And your therapist thinks this is borderline personality disorder. And I don't have a license to diagnose. Your therapist does. And so but that's sort of intriguing to me. I thought it sounded a little more like something else, like narcissism. It sounds pretty classic to me, but who knows? I'm always telling everybody, like, diagnosing people, whatever, because it doesn't really matter what you call it. What matters is how it affects you and what you're going to do about it to change your life and stop being suppressed and oppressed by people who treat you like that. That is the thing. So I think we're all in agreement. Yeah, this was not good. So you're just wondering, like, how did it take you so long? So you said in here that first of all, you were both immigrants, and also that you came from a dysfunctional family. You had a narcissistic father, and that's the deal, Narcissist parent primes you to be able to tolerate narcissists in later life. That's the deal. It creates a certain kind of dynamic. Sometimes it's codependent. I think that's a little bit what you're describing here, but you're describing something more. And it's just a weird way that you were crap fitting to this, where she would accuse you, you would believe it. She would get her feeling of being good and accomplished by putting you down. And you guys kept going like that. You would just keep donating your energy and self-worth to her, to the bottomless pit of her need, of her demand for your supply, of self-esteem, of confidence, of knowledge. And she reminds me of some people I've encountered with the sort of like positive, positive thinking, spirituality, all that stuff, the optimistic and vibrant thing. A lot of people call this toxic positivity. And I remember when I first heard that, I was like, how could positivity be toxic? It's so helpful to be positive. Well, compared to what I had been through, it was positive. But I've totally encountered this. There's, actually, in some of the circles that I overlap with in the Venn diagram of what's on YouTube, of like self-help, there's just like, you can do it. You just have to believe in yourself and all of this goes away. And I'm kind of, sometimes I have people like help me with my YouTube channel or my content. And I'm always like, here's the thing about us, like bad stuff actually did happen and we have to be sensitive to that. And so it just always strikes me as, it has its good side, but it can have this just totally fake, manipulative, yes, narcissistic side to it. And what I have noticed about it, you didn't say this about her, but what I've noticed about it is people who are into the toxic positivity, there's often kind of an addiction to cult-like figures and debting, just because there's kind of that belief, like if you just spend more money on this, you're going to have more of it. So it kind of goes along as sort of a package with a lot of stuff that seems pretty dysfunctional to me. But that said, it's not, that's just baby with the bathwater. There is so much to be gained by, learning from people who teach you how to like rethink things. I wouldn't be where I am if I hadn't been taught by, certain figures and leaders who teach you how to like, change how you see that. I used to feel quite defeated. I used to feel very limited by my trauma. So I get the attraction. And I was able to turn that around. A key moment for that was when I was participated in an exercise with a ton of people when I was deciding I was going to do Crappy Childhood Fairy. And the one big fear holding me back is that people would be mean to me online. And I was in this exercise where we just shouted out loud, people are going to give me hate mail. Yay. That means I'm in the game, And it was this good moment. So there's good to that. And I can see why you're attracted. And because you're kind of prone to depression, you didn't really talk about this, but I think that being an immigrant and being in a new place, I mean, you've obviously, you I don't even know what you do for a living, but why do I get the feeling like you got a lot going for you here. You got a lot going for you, but you would be a stranger in a strange land and trying to figure things out. And of course, like, good for you for just pursuing things that were positive, optimistic, forward thinking. But with the narcissist dad, yeah, you know, the person you picked had this downside, this very, very downside of them, where she flipped on you. And I think that's where your therapist thought borderline flipped on you, where it's all about, hey, you know, believe in this great thing, and then takes out all this crap on you. You know, I don't know if she idealized you. She idealized somebody, you know, out there, but then she devalues you, this total devaluation where she tears you apart in the conference room. And you felt like you deserved it. And that's what you were primed to do as a kid. So not your fault, not your fault. You keep asking, like, how could I do that? But you have this really nicely developed, like, I've got it together. Why am I letting this happen? It's like, because your childhood trauma is haunting you a little bit. It happens to everybody. And your awareness is very sharp right now. You feel it, you see it, you're doing something about it. You are going to be okay. You are going to get through this. You're on a good path. So every time you tried to get some distance from her, she'd immediately stop talking to you. So there's like the manipulative trauma bond behavior, you know, I shun you, I won't talk to you, I gossip about you. And then the nasty astrological thing, I could just picture that. That should be in a movie. It's almost like a comedy, you know, of just a horrible person just sitting there going, but your astrological sign is just SHIT, you know. It's funny from the outside, but I imagine it was hard at the time and you were in front of people. But you know what? I bet they saw it too. Well, they did. Nobody went to her going away party. That is so telling. She called you names and she would talk crap about anybody you hung out with. And then she would be angry at you because you wouldn't disclose private conversations that you had with people. That sounds really familiar to me, where she kind of sees you as an extension of herself and you has no right to have things that are private between you and other friends, right? That totally rings a bell. You know, what you're describing also is, it's like one of the sets of colors that people show when they were traumatized as kids. And you said, didn't she have an alcoholic mom? So, you know, that does a number on people. And alcoholic moms are very neglectful. And as somebody who had an alcoholic mom, I can just say that sometimes, you know, there's this phase of development where you blow your own horn because nobody ever did. And you just feel like you have to prove to everybody, look, I'm somebody, I'm great, you know, and it's a real turnoff to everybody. And if a person has some sensitivity, they notice that and can start growing out of that behavior and into something where they feel authentically good about themselves and can sort of relax and be themselves. She doesn't sound like she's in that place right now. So, but luckily she's in another country and you don't have to deal with this anymore. All right, so here's where I think it started to really get to you. You went back to college, so she went to college too. You took a vacation in August, she took a vacation in August. You felt like it was a competition, but you didn't even know what the competition was about. I don't know, maybe. I know that people like that do that, but also like August is the most common time for vacations, and going to college is something that young people do, so who knows. And she thanked you for what you taught. She hated that you were better. There's a movie kind of about that, loosely, you know, a little bit related, called All About Eve, that you might want to check out sometime, about a protege who comes and just sort of destroys the person who taught her. So she took you into the conference room 2 years ago and you defended yourself. Woo! I just love this scene where you did that. She tried to pour it out and then you just gave it to her. You were like, everyone walks on eggshells. You're a gossiper. You're a manipulator. You know, I don't care what you think about me. That's like the worst thing you can say to a narcissist. I don't even care what you think about me, right? I don't care. You don't want to hang out with me? Fine. We don't have to talk. Then she started crying and apologizing. And was it sincere? Who knows? I think people in the comments will take votes on that. But if she's a traumatized person, you know, when everybody abandons ship on her, then it is pretty frightening. But still, she's no friend of yours, is she? So she started again with the silent treatment. I am not a fan of the silent treatment. I just did a video about it. The silent treatment is manipulative and cruel and not acceptable in a relationship that anybody intends to continue and, you know, cherish. It's just not acceptable. So you thought you deserved it, but 6 months ago she went away. I don't think you thought you deserved it. I think that you started to rise above this when you stood up to her. So I think you're stronger than you know. But yeah, she had different rules for her life. She was fighting imaginary fights with imaginary enemies. Bullet points from Wikipedia narcissist, right? There were no limits for her to take revenge. So you wouldn't be surprised if she convinced, so she came back just to get you. So this is where maybe she did. I don't know. She had no other friends, right? Who knows what she was up to? But you know what? Your attitude of like, I don't even care, that is the correct one. Her actions have no meaning anymore to you. They just have no meaning. It doesn't matter because she's fighting an imaginary battle. If it's with you or somebody else, who even knows? And now you've moved on to a new job. So the question is, how can you stop going for the toxic people and hold your space for the good people? And the way you do that is by what you're doing right now. You're opening up the story for input. You have a therapist. You're sharing it here on YouTube with like thousands of people. Thousands of people will watch this. Many will weigh in and talk to you about it. But to face honestly, what were the red flags that you saw? What were the conditions that made you vulnerable? I heard you say you were lonely. It was kind of what you needed. You know what I've noticed is that when we're the most lost is when we're the most vulnerable to sort of narcissistic abuse, because what we sometimes gravitate towards, and sometimes in a positive and it works out well way, is to strong leader people. People who are like, this is what we're going to do. This is your program, sort of like the army, or getting into 12-step recovery or something with a strong sponsor. It's like somebody lays out the plan and you just do what you're told. And that can be very helpful. And then the second phase of development that comes after that is where you begin to individuate again. There's actually a movie I love that's about that progression where you get told what to do and then you individuate again, and it's called The Master. Fantastic movie out there. Okay. So I wish you luck. Sibel, I think you're on a good path. I answer a lot of letters and sometimes I'm sort of imploring people. It's like, really take seriously, watch out for yourself. I think you're in a good spot. I encourage you, I don't know if you're like geographically moving or anything, so I encourage you to have a community around you of people who know what it is you're working on, maybe people who have similar kinds of backgrounds that they're trying to resolve. You'd certainly always be welcome in our community, in our membership at Crappy Childhood Fairy. We have, a whole bunch of people who support each other here and use the tools here to get better. But it's so important as you use the tools that you choose that you have companionship with people so that you're not always just kind of off all by yourself, kind of losing the thread if somebody is manipulating you. I think it's realistic to expect that at least for some time in your life, you're going to have a vulnerability to people like that. You'll have a little bit of a blind spot. I have that with like drug addicts. You might have it with narcissists. So it's just to kind of respect that, to just go, sometimes I need guardrails, I need people, I need support to help me spot that when it's looking me in the face. If you took a poll and you had to name your 5 biggest triggers for trauma reactions, like feeling trapped or humiliated or having an angry outburst, one of them, if you're like me, would be bad customer service. It's one thing when it's a restaurant or a retail shop where you have the option of never going there again, but when it's your mobile phone carrier or your gas and electric company or your bank or your health plan, where you're at the mercy of the other person to like not cut off your access to these things you need, if they then treat you in a way that's unfair or demeaning or in a way that humiliates you in front of other customers, that can be a huge trigger for complex PTSD symptoms. Have you ever really lost your cool in those situations, either as a customer or as the customer service worker? If one person tips over into emotional dysregulation or says something unkind, it's really common for the other person to get tipped over too. Both people will spend the next several hours in a dysregulated state. And both people's families will likely find them stressed at the end of the day. And you can see how the ripple effect of one bad interaction can go on and on. But also, if one of those people can turn around a bad interaction or prevent it, or have a really positive customer service interaction, that also has a ripple effect on all the lives it touches. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. It's not just how bad customer service triggers CPTSD, but how good customer service can be a path of healing and even of joy. And I'm not exaggerating, a path of healing old traumas and bringing happiness and joy, even when you're just busy buying groceries, or even when you're in jobs that are considered menial. It doesn't always happen, but there are things you can do to tip it in the right direction. You want to talk about this? Now, why do I know about this stuff? A little known fact is 15 or 20 years ago, I used to be a customer service consultant, and I taught people how to transform customer service at the system level and at the level of one-to-one interactions. I loved this work. And before I ever made YouTube videos, and before I even knew the word for CPTSD, I was teaching some of these same principles that I teach on this channel. I was intuitively noticing trauma in people and how it affected them. And I was teaching about staying focused on the positive outcome that you want in an interaction, and about noticing and calming your triggers. And I'd get brought in to lead a half-day workshop, usually with a clinic team or a phone support department. Usually it was a group of workers who had been getting a lot of complaints from customers. So talk about a tough crowd. I'd walk in, and in almost every case, I'd face a group of people who were pissed off. They were feeling blamed, they were feeling tired, and they were just like daring me with their eyes to prove to them that I wasn't just one more useless trainer. And I'll tell you, I think a lot of my students back then were traumatized on the job from being immersed in bad interactions. They were often in systems that generated a lot of frustration and disappointment in customers. And the people working with those customers were bearing the brunt of that customer anger. They were getting blamed, but they didn't feel like they had the power to change anything. And for anyone who's ever had a job with conditions like that, you know it just sucks the life out of you. Your trauma goes up like a lot of the time. And when I'd start my workshop, I'd say most people felt like victims of their customers. And I could see how things got to that point. They weren't crazy, but they did have the power to make a lot of those interactions go differently, even so. And I knew I couldn't just start teaching it. I couldn't just begin and go to this room full of defensive, burned out people. They'd never listen to me. So I'd start by asking people if they'd had a bad customer service experience recently. Basically everyone has. And I'd just invite anyone who wanted to tell us about it. And within 10 seconds, the first hand went up, and then another hand, and then another, and another, and another. Because you know what? Everyone has been hurt as a customer before. And the stories came out, and the emotions came out, and people were laughing, and then they were crying, and they were talking about ways that bad customer service had hurt them and humiliated them and affected every part of their life, their health, their families, their kids, their self-confidence. And this was true not only when they were the customer in bad interactions, but when they were the worker who was maybe part of creating that bad interaction. It hurts both people, even when it's caused by just one of the people. The worker or the customer can cause it, and both are affected. So then I'd ask them, have you had any good customer service experiences lately? And how did that affect you? And these amazing stories would come out of incredible kindness, generosity, lives being changed, one life actually being saved, just like miracles. And then there'd be more laughter, more tears. And I'd ask them, when you're the person delivering customer service, if you could design all the days that you're going to be working in your life, would it be worth studying and practicing how you can deliver that good customer experience, not just for the customer, but for yourself? And everybody had this beautiful aha moment that customer service interactions are not this time like outside your life while you're just at work. This is a time, it's very much part of your life where you meet another human being and have the opportunity to help them feel seen and appreciated and cared for. And that is what everybody wants. And we give that to each other at the post office. We do it on the phone when we're, trying to keep our bill from being shut off. We do it at the doctor's office. And yes, even with your mobile phone service provider. even them. Now, I'll be the first to acknowledge how hard it's been for me at times to stay regulated in customer service interactions. I have a history of trauma already, and that can make me feel really triggered when I get treated like I'm dumb, and when I'm trying to get a problem solved and they're ma'aming me, saying, "Ma'am, you're gonna have to really calm down." Well, then I really can't calm down. And by the way, if you think that you get dysregulated, you can take my dysregulation quiz. There is a link to it below in the description section. I have it under almost every video, but it's definitely under this one. Staying regulated is especially hard in customer service situations where things are going wrong, but you have no choice but to get through it because you need that product or service or solution, and you just have to put up with any kind of bad treatment that they care to dish out. That is triggering. I'm talking about the person who puts you on hold for 45 minutes and then disconnects your call, or the healthcare front desk worker who makes you say why you're visiting the doctor, like right in front of 20 people in the waiting room, or the government office that requires you to wait for 4 hours in a dirty room to even find out that you didn't bring the right paperwork and they're rude. The manager, right, who comes out and tells you again, "Ma'am, calm down." You can tell, I really don't like that one. These experiences can feel demeaning, they're infuriating, they're unjust, and they can tap into deep parts of your old trauma, which is stuff you can't even connect to a specific experience necessarily in the past, but now, in the moment, it's coming out like lava inside, like an emotional flashback. It's a feeling of overwhelm, a feeling like you need to get out of there, or you need to express that anger that's coming up inside you. And you see sometimes as it's coming out, you see in other people's faces how it's affecting them. I don't know about you, but that's like a feeling of shame where, the feeling is really strong coming out. These are CPTSD reactions, and yes, they can be triggered by bad customer service. And I know a lot of you are nodding your heads right now thinking about some doozies of bad customer service you've had happen to you. And a lot of you are nodding too because you've been a service worker. Most of us have at one point or another, or you are right now, and you're going through this right now. Because it works both ways, right? Part of what's happening in a bad customer service interaction is that the people working in these roles can feel just as threatened by the customer's power as the customer does by the worker's power. Now, you may not feel like you have power as a customer, but the people who take jobs in customer service where, because of factors they can't always control, can also feel helpless in these situations. Well, in some organizations, these folks are encountering frustrated customers and getting yelled at all day. Have you ever had a job like that? And they also have a high probability of coming from a history of trauma. So to answer phones all day from angry customers, you'd almost have to have superpowers of dissociation that would allow you to just kind of like, check out and tolerate that kind of interaction, and getting hung up on, getting screamed at, or getting blamed or threatened that the customer is calling the manager and demanding that you be fired. Now, most customer service interactions are pretty good, honestly. We can be grateful for that, but oh my gosh, when it's bad, it's so very bad. And if you have CPTSD, a bad interaction can trigger dysregulation in you that lasts, for hours or days sometimes. Like a really bad interaction could cost me 3 days. I wouldn't be able to work very well or focus. It'd be almost like being sick. And that happening, if you don't have any way to sort of change that or control it, it can hold you back. It can keep you down professionally and as a person. And I'm torn apart when I see that. So many people are carrying trauma. And when one person's trauma gets set off, it easily spreads to the other person, and then another and another. And we're more connected than we realize sometimes, for better or for worse. Our nervous systems, our hearts, our emotions can be so tender. So we protect ourselves. We fight, we put up a wall. And that's why customer service interactions can be like this horrible mosh pit of aggression. But they can also provide opportunities for extraordinary human kindness and connection. It sometimes only takes one person, could be the worker, could be the customer, to turn it around. And it's worth being that person because why? Because even when you're on the phone with the gas company, even when you're at work at a job that's not so great, this is a day in your life. And no matter how trivial the task at hand is, there can be meaning in it because of the way that you're going to affect that other person who's there with you. Okay, so you ready for some tips? I'm going to start with 5 tips for workers, and then I'll give you 5 tips for customers. And it only takes one person, remember, sometimes, to shift a negative interaction into a more positive interaction. So for workers, number 1, make a welcoming statement. It's normally your role to acknowledge that a person has walked in the door or called you. So instead of saying, Dr. Smith's office, this is Wanda, what's your ID number? You can say, hello, thank you so much for holding. My name is Wanda, and I'm the front desk coordinator here. May I ask your name? Joseph Jacobs. What is it I can help you with today? So, yes, that took a few seconds longer than the perfunctory greeting that the first thing was, but it puts the whole interaction on a more personal footing. And when people recognize they're talking to a fellow human, someone who could be their sister or their son or their mother or their friend, they're more likely to feel safe and to feel a responsibility to treat you with respect and kindness. All right, the second tip, and this isn't rocket science, but it's a simple step that you always want to follow, and that's to use friendly words and tone of voice. So if you go, hi, how can I help you? It sounds different than, hi, how can I help you? If you use friendly words and tone of voice every time, the whole interaction can go in a completely different direction than it might have gone. And that's what you want. Good, friendly, connected interactions that make workdays feel like real experiences that are part of your real life. The third tip is to demonstrate empathy. So if a customer says, hi, I'm calling because I'm supposed to have a 9 o'clock appointment there today, but my car won't start and now I'm running late, you could say, okay, what time will you be here? But that's glossing over what the person just told you. So you can improve the interaction by acknowledging the problems that are mentioned, and problems are often why a customer service call or visit gets initiated, right? So when your customer says their car won't start and they'll be late for their appointment, you can first demonstrate empathy and say something like, oh no, that must be so stressful. Okay, let's figure out what we can do to make sure you still get seen today. Do you have a sense yet of how soon you can get here? And that sounds better, right? So the fourth tip for workers is to put things in the positive. So if that caller says, well, I'm waiting for roadside assistance and they said they'd be here at 9:15 or so, I think maybe I'll be able to get there at 10 or so, then your first reaction might be to say, 10? No, we won't have any appointments then. We're completely full. But even if you don't have any appointments, you can put things in the positive and say, it might be hard to fit you in at 10, but I'll tell you what we can do. If it works for you, we can reschedule you the day after tomorrow. And then see how the answer was still no, but it was described in such a nice way, I'll tell you what we can do, right? So whereas a hard no can set off old feelings of people not caring or helping this person, putting things in the positive can help them feel like, they have someone on their side, because they do. And finally, the fifth tip is to offer options. A big trigger for people with CPTSD is feeling trapped, needing something and counting on someone, but not getting it and getting trapped without what they need. And these emotions and triggers aren't happening consciously. They're happening because of years and lifetimes of experience being powerless and trapped. So when your patient says, I can get there at 10, you can say, okay, we don't have any slots at 10, but we can reschedule you tomorrow, or if you like, I can call you today if a slot opens up. It might not happen, but just in case it does, I can check and see if you'd be free to come in then. Now notice how the answer is still, you'll have to reschedule. But now it's a choice how they'll do it. And that helps them know that they're respected, that they have a say in this, and that you care about them. Okay, now if you're a patient or customer in a customer service interaction, here are 5 tips that you can use to help make that interaction not just go positively, but turn out well so that you get what you need, your problem gets solved, and you get respected and cared for. All right, 1, don't just begin with a question or complaint like, yes, I bought this flashlight here yesterday and it doesn't work. You can begin your interaction by making eye contact and smiling at the worker who's going to be helping you and greet them. This is to help create a connection of two people that sort of sets the foundation for a better interaction. Then you can tell them why you're there. So number 2 is, just like I told the workers in their 5 tips, your second tip is to use friendly words and friendly tone of voice. This is like the magic tonic for things that happen between people. Friendliness is something we all need, and it's more likely to elicit empathy and cooperation from the person who's working with you. Number 3 is explain the problem or complaint or need that you have as clearly as you can, without long stories, without blame. Even if the broken flashlight created a problem for you, you don't have to go into what the whole problem was. You can just tell them, it doesn't work. All right, because then number 4 is, if needed, to demonstrate empathy. When a customer has a complaint, or when a store is really busy, or when there have been problems, it can be really stressful for the worker too. So especially if the worker is accustomed to getting complaints from people who, give them a hard time, start raising their voice, you don't want them to go to that emotional place. You want them to know that you're on their side, that you're working together. Because if their defenses come up, there's a risk that they'll doubt you or say something snarky to you or act cold and stony-faced, and that could end up triggering you. Then the hard feelings come up. Then they start ping-ponging, and then you say something and they say something, and the whole thing can get very tense. So the solution is just stay kind and calm about the situation. Give the worker and the store the benefit of the doubt that they're acting in good faith. Let them know the resolution that you'd like. So in this case, let's say you want a replacement flashlight. And then that brings us to the 5th tip, which you might need if, say, they tell you they can't give you what you want. Let's say they've run out of flashlights, and it's tempting in those moments to let them know, I'm so irritated, I bought this, I was counting on this, it's going to be a big hassle to go get another one. Yeah, you want to tell them you're inconvenienced, but I'm just telling you, there's no point in bringing that in. They know that, they don't have another one. So just remember, these interactions are part of your life. You want your life to be good. So the best thing that can happen is to get your refund and go somewhere else. And then treating people right here in this interaction with patience and kindness and goodwill. That's what you're going to feel good about later. It's good to have those strengths with you, ready for anything. You've probably noticed that the customer service skills we're talking about are good for just about any situation in life. And it all has to do with noticing when you're dysregulated, getting regulated, and staying regulated more of the time so that you can show that kindness and patience with people.